anything is possible with a little bit of hobbying.
What's going on, tiny truckers? Today we're going to talk about mirroring the TGH Creeper T, and we're going to show you a little TGH hack here, and we're going to mirror a Vader monkey skid so that we can flip it on the other side. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to open our Vader skid. We're going to think about how it orientates. So in the chassis, this bat wing goes to the back of the chassis or towards the rear axle, which places your standard axial 3-gear transmission bolt pattern on the right side of the truck or the passenger side of the truck. Well, in the standard orientation of the Creeper T, it is designed to sit directly on top of this standard axial bolt pattern. In this case, we want to mirror our Creeper T and have it sit on the driver's side of the skid plate or the left side of the truck. So to do that, we need to flip the skid plate over, and this presents a slight problem, and that problem is that there are no countersinks in the bottom of this, in what would be the bottom of the skid. So there are no countersinks here. So we need to correct that so that when we flip it over and we bolt our TGH Creeper T to that skid plate, so that it's properly oriented, like so, we need to be able to have a countersink for our screws. So to do that, I use a IRWIN 3/4 inch countersink, and it's just a standard countersink. You can get these at your local Ace Hardware or from wherever it is that you source your tools, and you'll need a drill. So we'll chuck this up into a 3/8 drill. We'll flip this over. We want to try to keep our drill as perpendicular in both axes, so front to back and left to right. So we keep it perpendicular, and we apply a little pressure, and we countersink the screw, or the hole. So you can see I countersunk a little bit, but the screw still sticks through the top of the skid plate. So that is less than desirable, as that will catch rocks and wear the top of that screw off. So when we do this, we want to pay attention and make sure that we countersink far enough, checking in between that screw sits flush or just beneath the surface of the skid. And it takes a little finesse. The more you do it, the quicker it will be for you. So we're almost there, maybe just a touch more. Once we get our first hole countersunk, we can use that to judge the depth of the rest of our holes. You can see here, the screw sits nice and flush now in the skid. So we'll do the remaining 3 holes. It's best to take a little bit at a time, because it's always easier to take more away. It's very difficult to put the Delrin back. We'll give our holes one more check. Nice. So our screw sits nice and flush. We can move the drill out of the way. We no longer need that. Keep our work area clean, because we're going to break the transmission open at this point. And one thing not to forget is you want to put your TGH sticker on your truck as well as your Vader sticker from your skid, or wherever it is you keep your stickers. So now this was the original orientation of the skid with the prior to being counterboard. Now when we flip the skid over to the other side of the truck, we now have counterboard screw holes in the bottom side of the skid. So that's all we need to do there. So when we're mirroring the TGH Creeper T, we need a 2.0 driver, and we have 3 screws to remove. So we'll remove the 3 M2.5 by 6s. When you pull the cap off, or the front plate of the transfer case, just be gentle with it so that you don't pull everything out of the transfer case. These are keyed in, so they're a little snug. Okay. If you look closely, this bearing prevents these 2 gears from sliding out. So the first thing we're going to do is slide that bearing off, set it aside. Once we've done that, we can then pull the front output shaft out and set it aside, as well as the rear output shaft and gear assembly, and set it aside. Now we can pull the intake out, the input shaft out, and basically what we're going to do is flip its orientation. So we will put this bearing that we took off the input shaft on the front side of, or the back side of the transfer case. We will reverse the direction of the input shaft, but we can't put the input shaft in first because this bearing will prevent the other gears from going in, just like it prevented them from coming out. So we'll take our input gear, or excuse me, our front output gear, and we'll place it into the transmission like so. We'll take our rear output gear and we'll place it in the transmission. Now it's important to note the shafts, or these gear assemblies and the shafts, are now facing the opposite direction. So your front output is now coming towards the case, and your rear output is now coming towards the case cover. So once we've done that, we can then take our input shaft assembly and slide it through the transfer case. Mesh our gears, and there it is. Put our cover back on, make sure it's nice and keyed, give it a quick spin, reinstall our M2.5 by 6 screws. Before we snug these down tight, we're going to give the transmission a quick spin, or excuse me, the transfer case a quick spin. Make sure everything spins smooth, just in case we got some debris in there or something. So everything is good. So we'll snug those down. Alright, now here's where it can get a little tedious, because now the Creeper T has a beveled footprint, and that beveled footprint is to complement an angled skid. Okay, so in its original orientation, it would keep the output shafts perpendicular with the grade, or perpendicular with the pinion input shafts on the axles. But now that we've flipped the skid plate and we've mirrored the transfer case, and we're going to put it in here like so, you can see that if we have an angled skid, that our driveline angles are exaggerated. So to combat that, we have a wedge that offsets that angle. So we now have our TGH Creeper T. It's been mirrored, spins nice and smooth and bolted back together. Our Vader skid has been countersunk and flipped. At this point, we can now bolt the T case to the Vader skid. So on on the thin side of the wedge bracket that's included with the creeper tee, we will use 3x10mm screws, like so. Make sure that your front output faces the straight edge of the skid plate and not the batwing side. This can be a little cumbersome, but definitely doable. All right, so we've got that screw started. We'll leave it loose. We'll use a 3x12 on the opposite side. And we'll leave that one loose a little bit too. Now we have 2 more screws to install, so our thin side of the wedge, we'll use another 3x10. Get it started. On the thick side of the wedge, we will use a 3x12mm screw. Once all screws are started, and we can snug everything down nice and tight. And keep in mind, you're putting these stainless steel screws into an aluminum housing, so don't go crazy on it. They just need to be tight. They don't need to be chugga. We got nice smooth screws, and there it is. So when this is at an angle, it keeps everything nice and parallel.